The chandeliers glowed above a lavish banquet hall, their golden light spilling across polished marble floors. Waiters moved gracefully between round tables, serving wine and delicate hors d'oeuvres. The air buzzed with polite laughter and clinking glasses, the kind of evening where everyone wanted to impress, where reputations mattered more than the food itself. At the center of it all stood General Raymond Carter, a man whose name carried weight in both military and political circles. Decorated, commanding, respected by outsiders, but ruthless within his own home. He stood tall in his uniform, chest out, medals shining proudly as if each one was proof of his superiority. Around him, a small circle of guests hung on every word, eager to be part of his stories. Then, like a blade cutting through silk, his booming laughter filled the hall. He was pointing not at one of his protégés, not at a rival general, but at his own son. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said loudly, his voice echoing across the hall, "take a good look. This is my son, my blood. And yet—" He paused for effect, chuckling. "He's nothing like me. Weak, unfocused, no discipline. Unlike my Navy SEALs." A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Some smiled awkwardly, not sure whether to join in or remain silent. Others, emboldened by the general's arrogance, chuckled freely, glancing at the young man standing quietly near the back. The son, dressed in a simple black suit, didn't flinch. He didn't move, didn't even look away. He simply stood still, holding a glass of water loosely in his hand, as though his father's words had no weight. But his silence wasn't weakness. It was tension, coiled and unreadable, the kind that unsettled anyone who looked too closely. "Tell me," General Carter continued, his grin widening, "do you really think he could survive a single day of training? My men crawl through mud, fight through fire, bleed for honor. And him?" He scoffed, shaking his head. "He couldn't last an hour." The hall erupted again, some guests whispering, others shaking their heads as if in agreement. A few eyes turned to the Navy SEAL protégé seated near the front. Broad-shouldered, expression hard as stone, he didn't laugh. Instead, his gaze stayed fixed on the son, sharp, analyzing, searching. The father, enjoying his stage, raised his glass high. "To my real warriors! To the men who know strength." His voice carried pride, but there was venom in every word directed at his own child. The son finally lifted his eyes, calm and unwavering, locking onto his father's. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence was heavier than any insult, and from the corner the Navy SEAL leaned forward slightly, his jaw tightening. For the first time that night, his eyes widened, as though he recognized something no one else could see. Narrator. Everyone laughed with the general, but none of them knew the truth about the man they mocked. Until his Navy SEAL protégé whispered two words that silenced the entire room. The banquet hall stretched wide like a ballroom from another era. Marble pillars lined the walls, each draped with banners celebrating General Raymond Carter's latest military achievements. Photographs of him shaking hands with world leaders hung in gilded frames, a constant reminder of his prestige. A live string quartet played softly in the background, their music drowned out by the low hum of voices, clinking glasses, and bursts of laughter. Guests were gathered in clusters, their polished shoes clicking on the marble as they moved from table to table. Every detail screamed of wealth and power, the crystal chandeliers, the golden trim on the tablecloths, even the military medals displayed in glass cases near the entrance. This wasn't just a party. It was a stage for the general to display his dominance, to bask in admiration. At the center of it all, the general thrived. With every boastful story, more guests leaned in. His booming voice carried easily across the hall, demanding attention whether people wanted to give it or not. The smell of expensive cigars lingered near his circle, mingling with the sharp aroma of champagne. It was clear who owned the room, and yet, on the far side of the hall, stood his son, a silent shadow in the glittering storm. Unlike the guests in tailored tuxedos and designer gowns, he wore a plain black suit, neat but unremarkable. No medal pinned to his chest, no name whispered in admiration. To the crowd, he was nobody. To his father, he was an easy target. People stole glances at him between sips of wine, their expressions a mix of pity and mockery. A group of young officers near the buffet whispered just loud enough for him to hear. "Doesn't look like a soldier. Probably never even touched a gun." One of them snickered, shaking his head. Still, the son remained unmoved. He sipped from his glass of water, gaze steady, posture calm. He seemed detached, almost as if he wasn't even present. But to anyone watching closely, and one man was, his composure wasn't emptiness. It was control. That man was Lieutenant Marcus Hale, the general's prized Navy SEAL protege. Muscular, disciplined, scar running down his cheek, he was everything the general glorified in public. Marcus had fought battles overseas, earned medals of his own, and followed the general like a loyal shadow. Tonight he was seated only a few steps away from the general's pedestal, but Marcus wasn't laughing. While others smiled at the general's cruel jokes, Marcus studied the sun with sharp eyes. He noticed the way his hand rested casually by his side, yet his shoulders carried the posture of someone trained, balanced, unshaken. He noticed the faint scar peeking from beneath the cuff of his sleeve, almost hidden. But not to someone who knew what scars from covert missions looked like. The contrast between father and son couldn't have been sharper. General Carter basked in the spotlight, soaking in praise while his son stood silently in the shadows, ignored, underestimated. And yet, Marcus felt something unsettling, a sense that the wrong man was being celebrated. "Gentlemen," the general boomed again, raising his glass. "My SEALs here, they are the definition of discipline. The strongest men I know. Men like Marcus, sharp, fearless, unbreakable. Now, if only my son had even half their spirit." He laughed, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. All eyes turned again to the sun. Guests smirked, expecting him to react, to show some crack in his composure. But he didn't. His eyes flicked briefly toward Marcus. Just a second, but enough. It wasn't a look of envy nor weakness. It was recognition. Marcus stiffened slightly. That glance carried something unspoken, something he had only seen in soldiers who'd walked through fire and returned alive. He shifted in his chair, ignoring the general's laugh as his thoughts began to race. The room didn't notice. They were too busy cheering the general's toast, raising their glasses in shallow admiration. Waiters weaved between them, refilling champagne, offering trays of appetizers no one touched. The general's arrogance had become entertainment. The son's silence had become a joke. But Marcus was no longer entertained. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, eyes locked on the man everyone else dismissed. The music swelled, the chatter filled the air, but to Marcus it all faded into the background. He was staring at the sun, at the faint scar, the stillness, the quiet defiance. And for the first time that evening, Marcus's composure cracked. His chest tightened with a thought that made his throat dry. Could it be him? The hall was alive with laughter and vanity, but beneath the chandeliers and clinking glasses, another current was forming, unseen by the crowd, unnoticed by the general. A storm was quietly building in the silence of the sun, and Marcus could feel its weight pressing down on him. The laughter in the banquet hall was already loud, but when General Carter raised his voice again, the atmosphere shifted. The string quartet slowed, waiters paused mid-step, and all conversations seemed to quiet just enough for his words to dominate. "Ladies and gentlemen," the general announced, swirling his glass of champagne with exaggerated grace, "allow me to introduce my son." Dozens of eyes turned in the same direction, toward the quiet figure standing by the far column. He hadn't moved in over an hour, hands loosely at his sides, expression unreadable. Now with the spotlight burning down on him, whispers began to weave through the crowd. "That's his son? Doesn't look like much. Not exactly cut from the same cloth, is he?" The general grinned at the ripple of murmurs, clearly pleased with the effect. "Yes, my very own flesh and blood," he continued. "But don't be fooled, friends, he is nothing like me. No medals, no discipline, no victories. Just a boy who prefers shadows to glory," the crowd chuckled. Some laughed outright. The son remained still. He didn't flinch. His calmness only seemed to fuel his father's cruelty. The general set his glass down with a sharp clink. "Do you know what he told me once?" he said, voice booming now, ensuring the entire hall could hear. "He said he didn't want to follow in my footsteps. Can you imagine?" He spread his arms wide as if to present himself as a gift to the world. "Who wouldn't want to be me?" A ripple of polite laughter rose from the crowd. Not everyone found it funny, but few dared not to laugh when the general demanded it. Marcus Hale, the Navy SEAL, sat straighter. His jaw tightened. His gaze flicked between the general and the son, watching, calculating. He had fought under the general's command long enough to know the man craved control, but this cruelty felt different. It was personal. The general wasn't just humiliating his son. He was dismantling him piece by piece, brick by brick in front of strangers. You know what else he told me? The general pressed on, voice dripping with mockery. He said, "I'm not like you, father." He imitated the son's voice in a childish whine, earning another round of laughter. "Not like me? You're damn right you're not like me. You don't have the strength, the will, the discipline. You don't even have the guts to wear a uniform." The hall erupted again. Laughter, snickers, whispered insults, but not from Marcus. His eyes narrowed, fixed on the son. Still no reaction, no anger, no shame, just silence. It was unsettling. Men insulted at this level usually broke. Flushed faces, clenched fists, defensive outbursts. But this man didn't. He stood like an anchored ship in a storm, refusing to be moved. The general leaned forward, finger pointing across the room. "Look at him!" he barked, standing there like a ghost, no fire in his eyes, no courage in his heart. "While my men—" He slapped Marcus's shoulder so hard the seal's drink almost spilled. "My men bleed for honor, sacrifice for glory, earn their place in history." Marcus swallowed hard, keeping his composure, but his thoughts raced. That scar on the son's wrist, that controlled stillness. He had seen it before, in men who had killed without hesitation, men who had survived things civilians couldn't imagine. "Tell me, son." The general sneered, his voice slicing through the hall. "What do you contribute here tonight? What have you ever contributed in your life?" The silence that followed was heavier than the chandelier hanging above them. Dozens of eyes locked on the sun. The air felt thick, suffocating. Even the quartet's bows hovered midair, strings quiet. The son finally lifted his head, his gaze steady on his father. His voice, when it came, was calm, almost too calm. "I contribute by not pretending." Gasps rippled through the room. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, but the words landed like a blade across his father's pride. The general froze for a moment. His smirk faltered. Then it returned, sharper, crueler. "Not pretending?" He laughed bitterly. "You've done nothing but pretend. Pretend to matter. Pretend to be strong. Pretend to belong in a family of warriors." He turned to the crowd, raising his voice again. "Tell me, friends, does anyone here believe this boy could last a single day in combat? That he could hold his ground against real enemies? That he could stand beside men like Marcus Hale?" The crowd responded with awkward laughter, some shaking their heads, others exchanging knowing looks. A woman in pearls whispered to her companion, "He doesn't look like a soldier at all." The general pounded the table for emphasis. "Exactly. He is weak, ordinary, forgettable." He spat the last word like venom. "My greatest disappointment." Marcus clenched his fists under the table. His gut twisted, but not out of pity. Out of recognition. That scar, that posture, that silence. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only those at his table could hear. "General," his eyes never left the son. "Are you sure you know who you're talking about?" The general frowned, confused. "What are you babbling about, Hale?" But Marcus didn't answer. His pulse quickened, his chest tight, because he knew now, with every instinct sharpened by years on the battlefield, that the man standing across the hall wasn't weak. He was dangerous. And for the first time that night, Marcus wasn't laughing either. The banquet hall vibrated with murmurs after the general's cruel toast. Laughter had subsided into whispers like ripples after a stone sinks in water. Eyes shifted back to the quiet figure at the far end of the hall. The son. His father expected rage, maybe even tears. The crowd waited for a scene, for the weak son to finally break under the weight of humiliation. But instead, he simply took a slow sip of water, set the glass down gently, and walked toward the center of the room. The sound of his footsteps echoed against the marble floor. Click, click, click. Every head turned, the hall falling into a hush as he crossed the distance without hurry, without hesitation. When he stopped, only a few feet from his father, he spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried, low, steady, like a knife sliding out of its sheath. "You're right," he said. A few gasps escaped the crowd. The general raised an eyebrow, lips curling in satisfaction. "You're right," the son repeated. "I'm not like you." The general smirked, tilting his chin toward the audience. "You hear that? At least he admits it." But before the laughter could rise again, the son added, I don't need to shout to prove my worth. And I don't measure strength in medals or applause. The words hung in the air, sharp and unsettling. The general scoffed. Big talk for a boy who's done nothing. Done nothing? The son asked softly, almost to himself. He tilted his head slightly, his calm gaze fixed on his father. Maybe, or maybe you've simply never noticed what doesn't glitter under your chandeliers. The crowd stirred. People leaned forward, their curiosity overtaking their amusement. Something about his tone carried weight, a quiet authority that didn't match the picture his father painted. The general slammed his fist onto the table. Do not play games with me, boy. You stand here with no rank, no record, no name that anyone respects. You've hidden in shadows your entire life. The son's lips curved into the faintest smile. Shadows aren't always weakness, father. Sometimes shadows are where the real work gets done. Marcus Hale's chest tightened. Shadows. That word struck him like a blade. He had heard it before, whispered in covert briefings, attached to names that never made headlines but shaped wars. His eyes flicked again to the scar on the son's wrist, then to his posture, relaxed, yes, but balanced, like a fighter waiting for the first strike. The general scoffed louder, turning back to the guests. You see? This is what I deal with. Riddles and excuses. He hides behind words because he has no deeds. But Marcus wasn't laughing. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, studying the son's every move. His instincts screamed that this was no ordinary man. The son finally turned his head slightly, sweeping his gaze across the crowd. His eyes were calm, unhurried, but when they landed on people, they felt like a weight pressing into their chest. Conversations died instantly. Whisperers fell silent. Even the quartet lowered their bows. Then his gaze shifted back to his father. If you think silence means weakness, he said evenly, then perhaps you've forgotten that storms don't announce themselves until they arrive. The room went utterly still. The general's smirk wavered for just a second before he barked out a laugh, trying to shake off the tension. Storms? Ha! You wouldn't know a storm if it hit you in the face. But the crowd didn't laugh this time. Too many of them had felt the weight of that sentence. Too many sensed something hidden beneath his calm exterior. The son didn't press further. He simply clasped his hands behind his back and stood in silence, eyes steady, as though daring anyone to challenge him again. The general, flustered by the lack of laughter, slammed his glass down so hard it cracked. Enough of this nonsense. You'll never be more than a shadow in my light. The son only replied with a whisper that carried further than a shout. Then perhaps you've mistaken where the light truly comes from. A collective breath escaped the hall. The crowd wasn't sure if they had just witnessed defiance or a warning. Marcus, however, was sure. His pulse raced, his instincts screaming louder now. He knew that calm tone, that quiet fire. He leaned toward the general and whispered under his breath, not to protect him, but to prepare him. Sir, I think you should stop. The general ignored him, too drunk on pride, too blind to see the storm building right before his eyes. And the son? He stood perfectly still, calm as ever. The silence before thunder. The silence in the banquet hall was suffocating. The son's last words. Perhaps you've mistaken where the light truly comes from. Still hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Guests shifted uneasily, unsure whether to laugh, to clap, or to stay silent. The general, red-faced and restless, refused to let go of control. His pride was bleeding, and like any wounded beast, he lashed harder. You dare to speak to me in riddles? To me? He slammed his palm on the table, rattling silverware. You stand here in front of men who have fought wars, and you spout poetry like some street philosopher? The crowd stirred. Some smirked, siding with the general. Others stayed quiet, their gazes flicking nervously between father and son. The son didn't answer. He simply stood, hands clasped behind his back, gaze unwavering. The calmness of his silence now felt different. It wasn't defensive. It was dangerous. The general laughed bitterly, though his voice cracked just slightly. Fine, you want to act mysterious? Then let's put this to the test. Marcus! All eyes turned to the Navy SEAL seated near the general. Marcus Hale stood slowly, his presence towering over the table. Muscles taut, scars visible under the chandelier light, he looked every inch the soldier people expected. Show them, the general barked. Stand beside him. Let these people see the difference between a man of steel and a shadow. The son finally moved, turning his head slightly toward Marcus. Their eyes locked. For the first time all night, the faintest hint of a smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. Marcus froze. That look, that calm, almost amused defiance. He had seen it before. Not in training, not in friendly rivalries, but in the eyes of ghosts from classified missions. Men whose names were never written, whose existence was denied, yet whose impact shook nations. The hall held its breath as Marcus stepped forward, closing the gap between them. He stood face to face with the man everyone dismissed, studying every inch of him. The scar on the wrist, the subtle stance, not stiff, not casual, but balanced, weight evenly distributed like a predator at rest. Marcus's throat went dry. His chest tightened. And then it hit him. His voice lowered to a whisper, meant for the sun alone. Black Widow? The reaction was instant. The sun's eyes narrowed, sharp as blades. Not denial. Not confusion. Just quiet acknowledgement. Marcus felt his pulse spike. His entire body tensed as if preparing for a fight. He had heard that name whispered only in sealed briefings, among men who carried secrets heavier than metals. Black Widow, a ghost in the intelligence community. A phantom who dismantled entire networks, eliminated high-value targets, and vanished without a trace. No one ever confirmed if he truly existed. He was myth, rumor, legend, and he was standing here, the general's son. Marcus stumbled back a half step, his composure cracking for the first time. His whisper wasn't as quiet this time. My God. It is you. The crowd didn't catch the words, but they caught Marcus's reaction. The way his steady soldier's demeanor fractured into something like fear. Gasps rippled through the hall. Guests exchanged confused looks. Whispers darted between them. What did he say? Who is he? What's happening? The general, oblivious to the shift, roared with laughter. What's the matter, Hale? You look like you've seen a ghost! He sneered at his son. Is my disappointment making you nervous now? But Marcus didn't answer him. His eyes were locked on the sun. No, on the man he now knew wasn't ordinary at all. The son finally spoke, his voice low, steady, and filled with quiet authority. I didn't come here to prove myself to you. His eyes flicked to his father for just a moment before returning to Marcus. I came because I was curious how long you'd all keep pretending. The crowd fell into stunned silence. Marcus's hands curled into fists at his sides. Not out of aggression, but out of instinct. The way a soldier braces when he realizes the battlefield is nothing like he expected. The general, still laughing, slapped Marcus on the shoulder. Look at him, Hale. Still speaking nonsense. You see why I don't take him seriously? Marcus didn't return the laugh. He didn't even move. Slowly, he turned his head toward the general, his expression grave. Sir, with all due respect, I think you're the one not taking him seriously enough. The general's grin faltered. What the hell are you talking about? Marcus looked back at the son, his voice just above a whisper. Your Black Widow. The words cut through the hall like thunder. Guests gasped. Glasses clinked as hands trembled. A woman dropped her champagne flute, the shatter echoing across the marble floor. The general's face went pale. For the first time that night, he looked genuinely shaken. The son didn't confirm, but he didn't deny. He simply tilted his head, eyes calm, expression unreadable. And in that silence, the truth spoke louder than any admission. The myth was real. The shadow had a name. And he was standing right here in the middle of the general's banquet, watching his father crumble without lifting a finger. The whisper echoed like a thunderclap. Your Black Widow. The words slipped from Marcus Hale's lips, but they struck every ear in the banquet hall. For a moment, no one moved. No one breathed. The chandeliers glittered above a room frozen in disbelief. Then, chaos. Gasps erupted across the hall. A woman clutched her pearls so tightly they snapped, beads scattering across the marble. Men exchanged wide-eyed glances, some whispering furiously, others too stunned to speak. Black Widow? Impossible. That's just a myth. But Marcus wasn't backing down. His face, usually carved from stone, now held raw awe. He stood straighter, shoulders squared, voice firm. He's real. And he's standing right here. The general barked a laugh, high-pitched and nervous, a crack in his once iron facade. Nonsense. He's nothing. A weakling who hides behind words. This is just some trick. But his words no longer landed. The room had turned against him. For years, people had nodded, laughed, and clapped at every word the general said. Tonight, no one laughed. Tonight, they stared at him the way a jury stares at a guilty man. A young officer near the buffet whispered to his companion, "Look at Marcus." He's not joking. If he believes it, the companion swallowed hard. Then it must be true. The general slammed his fist on the table. "Stop this madness. He is my son, nothing more. Do you think I wouldn't know if my own flesh and blood was some phantom assassin?" The son finally moved, stepping forward into the center of the hall. His calm presence sucked the air out of the room. He didn't raise his voice. "He didn't need to. You never knew me, father." That was always the problem. The hall fell silent again. Every word weighed heavy, landing harder than any shout. Marcus's jaw tightened. He nodded once as if confirming for the crowd. "I've seen that scar before. I've seen that stance. I've heard stories of operations no soldier was supposed to survive. Operations that ended with whispers of one codename. Black Widow." The crowd shivered. These were powerful men and women, used to influence and control, but in that moment they felt small, sitting in the presence of something larger than medals and titles. One by one, the masks dropped. Murmurs shifted into judgmental stares, not at the son, but at the father. Guests who once laughed at his insults now looked at him with thinly veiled contempt. His arrogance had been entertaining when the son was nobody, but mocking a man of myth? A man feared even in secret files? That wasn't bravery. That was foolishness. The general's hands shook as he reached for his glass, only to realize it was already shattered from his earlier rage. He looked around for support, but none came. His audience had turned jury, and their verdict was clear. "You humiliated him," an older colonel muttered under his breath. "In front of all of us, and he—" The colonel trailed off, shaking his head. He never even raised his voice. A woman in diamonds whispered, "Power doesn't need to shout." "Look at him." The general's face flushed crimson. "You're all blind. He's nothing without my name." The son's eyes flicked toward him, calm, steady. "Your name opened doors. Mine closed them. That's the difference." It was the final crack. The general's voice faltered, no longer carrying the command it once did. He sputtered, looking for words, but none came. The crowd's silence wasn't passive anymore. It was active, suffocating. Every stare was a verdict. Every whisper was a sentence. Marcus stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "General Carter, with respect, you've been barking at shadows your whole life. And now you find out the shadow had teeth?" Gasps again. The once loyal protégé had shifted sides. The general staggered back a step. His eyes darted around the room, searching desperately for an ally. But no one moved. Not one hand lifted in his defense. Even his closest officers stayed silent, afraid to attach themselves to his crumbling pride. The son didn't press further. He didn't gloat. He simply stood, calm and unyielding, while his father's empire of fear and arrogance collapsed under its own weight. For the first time in his life, General Raymond Carter looked small. The hall was no longer a banquet. It was a courtroom, and the sentence had already been passed. The silence was unbearable. The banquet hall, once alive with laughter, music, and clinking glasses, now felt like a mausoleum. Chandeliers glowed overhead, but their light seemed harsh, exposing every crack in the general's armor. Raymond Carter stood trembling, his once iron posture hunched, his face drained of power. His voice had always been a weapon, sharp and commanding, but now it faltered like a broken radio. This is absurd," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. No one answered. Not even his most loyal officers dared to lift their eyes. They had seen it, the whispers, the scars, the unwavering presence of the man he mocked. And they had judged. The son didn't move for several seconds. He just stood in the center of the room, calm, his breathing steady. Where his father looked small, he looked infinite. Where Raymond sought control, his son radiated it without effort. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. "You wanted me weak, father. That way you could stay strong. But strength built on another man's humiliation," he paused, eyes narrowing, "isn't strength at all. It's fear." The words landed like hammers. The general flinched, but the son didn't stop. "You mocked me in front of strangers. You thought breaking me would make you bigger. But all you've done tonight is reveal yourself. They don't laugh with you anymore, father. He gestured to the crowd. They laugh at you. A ripple of whispers spread across the hall. Some people smirked. Others averted their gaze. But none came to the general's defense. Raymond slammed his fist against the table, desperate. Enough, you are nothing without me. The son tilted his head, his eyes like steel. Without you? I became Black Widow, gasps echoed. It was the confirmation everyone feared, the truth whispered but never spoken aloud. The son stepped closer, his presence towering though his tone never rose. While you were chasing medals, I was cleaning the shadows you pretended didn't exist. While you gave speeches, I erased threats before they ever reached your podium. And while you mocked me, I carried the weight you never could. Raymond's lips trembled. His knees threatened to buckle. But pride forced him to remain standing. The son leaned in, his final words low, meant for his father's ears but heard by everyone. You always wanted a soldier who would obey you. What you got instead was a ghost who never needed you. He stepped back, turning his back on the general, a gesture louder than any insult. It was dismissal. Marcus Hale, the Navy SEAL protege, straightened and gave a sharp nod. Not to the general, but to the son. A soldier's salute, brief but heavy with meaning. The crowd followed. Not in salutes, but in silence, respect heavy in the air. The balance of power had shifted completely. Raymond Carter, the man who once commanded fear, now stood abandoned in the wreckage of his own arrogance. The son reached the doorway. Before leaving, he turned one last time, his expression unreadable. Father, you taught me that family was weakness. Tonight, you proved yourself right. And with that, he walked out. The door shut behind him with a hollow thud, sealing the verdict. No applause followed. No cheers. Only the sound of a broken man gasping for air in a hall full of silent witnesses. The legend of General Carter ended that night. The legend of Black Widow began.